on a little cruise with a group to give chizuk someplace. We were in the water, and I just looked around, and I said, you know, this is amazing. First time in my life. We were in the river, and I said, I'm looking on one side, I'm looking at the BQE, and the other side at the FDR Drive, and there's no traffic, and I'm stuck in a boat in the middle. First time that ever happened. But I think it was a very moving moment, because I think what you just heard is really the moment of life. Life is opportunities. Most of the time, opportunities that come so fast that we could miss it. There was a certain town, there was a famous rich person, Baron Greenberger. Baron Greenberger was the Gevir, he was the rich man of the town. No one messed with him. And one of the things that he bought for himself every single year was Petichat Ne'ilah, Psichat Ne'ilah, the way we call it. Before the Ne'ilah, Shmon Esrei on Yom Kippur, the climax of Yom Kippur, someone gets the honor of opening the Aron Kodesh and to stand over there in front of the open Aron Kodesh, and he kind of, in a sense, leads the last request. So, and it was a given every single year. It was almost a rubber stamp that Baron Greenberger, the rich man, he bought this great honor, Petichat Ne'ilah. And one day, there's a new rich guy on the block, Baron Polak. Baron Polak was not Shomer Shabbat, didn't know much, but he did like the kavod that you get in shul, and he came, and he did something unprecedented. He challenged Baron Greenberger. And when the Gabbai said, okay, 1,000 ruble for Petichat Ne'ilah, it was almost a rubber stamp. Baron Greenberger, Baron Polak picks up his hand and he goes 2,000. He says 3,000. He says 4,000. I can't believe it. And Baron Greenberger the Baron was fighting for his life. You know, he was lose his stature now, and it went up to a whopping sum of 55,000 ruble, which the Gaboyim of the Beis Medrash were quite pleased with. They needed new towels, a lot of new things for a while. And Baron Polak got it. He unseated Baron Greenberger for this kavod. And it came before Ne'ilah, they turned to Baron Polak, they said, go ahead. He says, go ahead what? They said, do what you have to do. He says, I don't know what to do. He says, you bought Petichat Ne'ilah. He says, I don't know what that means. So they show him, you open up the door. He's trying to figure out why he spent 55,000 ruble on opening a door. So they went over to him and asked him, they said, why did you spend 55,000? Why did you buy something that you don't know what it is? He said, I know one thing. If Baron Greenberger was willing to go up to 54,000, he never made a bad deal in his life. I was willing to spend 55,000 for it, even though I don't know what it means. It says, I'll find out afterwards. I think when we think about education for our children, think about this for a moment. Why are you all here tonight in this wonderful lechtige, lit up, you feel the Kedusha, the Rav, the new community starting. It's so beautiful. Why are you all here tonight? Why you're here? I'll tell you why you're here. Rav Belsky, my Rosh Hashiva, Schachter, used to say this all the time, and I'll repeat it. There was a magazine called Look Magazine. Anyone remember Look Magazine? You don't have to admit that you remember it, because it goes back. You remember it, huh? Okay. And Look Magazine once ran a cover story. And their cover story was The Vanishing Jew, and they had a bunch of predictions. And the predictions were very mathematical. The predictions were very accurate. And in its time, it said basically, given the assimilation rate and everything else that was taking place, and anti-Semitism, they predicted, Rahman al-Itzlan, that within 50 years, there will be no Jews left on the planet Earth. And they stood behind their story. And when people challenged them, they said, look, we're not anti-Semitic, we're just stating a fact. Look at the world, look at the assimilation, look at what's going on, look at what's going on in Europe. In 50 years, the Jewish people will be extinct. And 50 years later, they were right. There was extinction. But the only thing that was extinct was Look Magazine. Jews are still around. What happened? What changes in our life? Why are we still here? The total population of Jews in America, I may be off by my numbers, but more or less, just to get the idea, in the early 1900s was approximately there were 3 million Jews in America. Now, if you take into consideration that the entire population of America at that time was 150 million, okay? And now it's 300 million, 350 million, right? It may be more, it depends when President Trump builds his fence, however you want to look at it. But it's more. And America always opened up its doors wide to take people in. But then there should have been then 6 million Jews, okay? Now let's go a little bit further. If you talk about the waves of immigration of Jews throughout the 1900s, when the Statue of Liberty still meant what she was saying she meant, before the doors of immigration were closed. If you take that into consideration, plus the fact that the doubling of the population, if you do the statistics, now I'm not good in math, but I once read a report on it, there should have been in America today close to 17 or 18 million Jews. We're at about 5 point something. What happened? Where are they? Yes, it's a ness, who we are, but where did they go? Now, out of the 5 point X amount of Jews that are 5 million are in America, how many are halachically Jewish? How many are just Jewish by heart? How many are Shomer Torah Mitzvot? How many would have the idea that at 12 o'clock at night on a Saturday night you're sitting in a shul? There are a lot of other places that serve better food out there, aren't there? So why are you here? Why are you here? It doesn't make sense. Mark Twain asked. It just doesn't make sense. Yeah, he had a good kasha there. And the answer is, this is how my Rosh Hashiva said, and this applies to every single person sitting in this room, that somewhere along the line, 2 years ago, 100 years ago, 300 years ago, 3,000 years ago, there was a grandmother by lighting Hadlakat Nerot, Erev Shabbat, that shed a tear, my children should remain Jewish. You had a grandfather, a great-grandfather, someplace that sat down and said, and shed a tear and said, God, do whatever you want with me, but please let me have Jewish children. And those tefillot are not lost. And that's why you're here. That's why you're here now. Because the statistics of you being here, Look magazine is right. There's math. I was flying on a plane from Detroit, and somebody gets onto I meet a friend of mine, he says, oh no, I don't want to be on the same flight as you. I said, what's your problem? He says, wherever you go, there are stories. I don't want stories. I said, come on. I said, everyone has stories. You just have to see them. And as we're sitting there, this gentleman comes over to us, and he tries to say, what he was talking about. He was trying to convince us to buy some stock in an oil field someplace underneath the water, I don't know. And we're looking at him. He says, I do business with all Jews, he says. All the Jews? All of them, huh? So we thought it would be a good idea to pass on this wonderful opportunity. In Yiddish, there's an expression, you don't have to dance by all the weddings, Take it easy. Okay, so he left us. So the guy says to me, you see, I don't like traveling with you. I'm traveling on business for years. No one ever came over to me and tried to sell me stocks in an oil field at an airport. You're here. I said, what do you want from me? So we get onto the plane, and I'm sitting, and this fellow is sitting behind me, and our stockbroker gets on. He sits down in the first class, just like it's a single body plane. It's on the same level. And I see the stewardess is coming over to him, and the stewardess is saying, this is your seat? He shows his boarding pass. She's like confused. And out comes like a supervisor. He shows his boarding pass. Out comes the pilot. He shows his boarding pass. He grabs the boarding pass out of his hand, and he says, get to the back of the plane. The guy gets up, walks to the back of the plane. So I didn't really catch on so fast what happened, but my companion over here that wasn't very happy about traveling with me, he leans over, and he says to me, you realize what happened? His seat was 11A. He saw nobody was sitting there, so he sat down, and when the stewardess asked him for his boarding pass, he covered one of the ones with his thumb. So it looked like 1A. But the pilot realized who he was, and sent him all the way to the back of the plane. Okay, so I said, fine, that's a good story. That's good for at least 6, 7 speeches, And up comes the gentleman. You know how it is when you're sitting on a plane and you wonder who's going to sit down next to you? It's like, there's one empty seat, and you're hoping you'll have a place for your suitcase or your hat or something, and then somebody gets on, and you're looking, oh no, not him, not her. And somebody gets on, I don't know why, I knew he's going to sit next to me. Couldn't explain it. And he comes, and I this is your seat, and I get up, and I help him with the suitcase and the overhang, and he sits down next to me, and he gives me this look. Didn't look too happy that he was sitting next to me. Can't help you, pal. Finally, he says to me, what do you do? Hello, how are you? I said, I don't know. He says, excuse me? He goes, where are you from? I said, from Brooklyn. He goes, oh, so you're a Brooklyner, huh? How do you answer a question like that? I said, where are you from, sir? He tells me Southfield, Michigan. I wanted to tell him, so you're a Michiganer, but I did. I decided not everything, One need not always pull the trigger, when not necessary. So finally he tells me, what are you doing? He says, what do you do? What do you do? I said, I hang around, I said, what do you do? He says, you never read my book? I said, no. And he starts telling me that he's works for actuaries and basically he predicts things. And he works with law enforcement and with insurance companies. And he has a whole theory based on a person's social past and his behavior. And basically on his past rap sheet, he has a whole mahalach. He has a whole criteria of how he takes out his laptop. He's showing me all kinds of graphs. And he says, I know when a person's going to commit his next crime. I know when a person's going to get divorced. He knows everything. I was going to ask him where Mashiach is coming. I didn't say anything to him. And I said to him, but people change, don't they? And he looks at me, very angry that somehow he considered this a challenge to him. And he said, this is science. It's perfect. I guess he meant to say as opposed to religion, which is not perfect. So I said, okay, we'll put the issue at rest. You sit, I'll sit. Plane ride is only an hour and a half. And in the middle, the stewardess comes over and offers him a cup of Coke, and he fills it up. They have those, half cans of Coke, and they have these plastic wide rim glasses. And he fills up the cup all the way to the top. He's making kiddush. And as he's holding it, the plane runs into a lot of turbulence, and it starts spritzing all over the place. And he goes, what should I do? I said, drink it. He said, I can't get it to my mouth. So he goes and he puts it down on the tray, which of course did not help because the entire plane was turbulence. Even I'm not such a I'm not into physics so much, into ballistics, but that much I understood also. So finally I asked him, well, why did you fill it up to the top? He says, well, this never happened to me before. So I said, I thought you always know what's going to happen to you. That was the end of the conversation. But the real answer to the question is, yeah, the math and science says one thing. And the math and science is correct. But Hashem says, guess what? I run the world. The sophisticated computer models that said that the brunt of the storm is going to hit Miami were correct. It's just that God changed it and it hit Tampa. Those same computer models that said that the next hurricane is going to swirl out into sea is now saying, hey, look out, New York. The end of the day, science is science, and math is math, and reality is reality. There is a reality, there is a tomorrow that is a step ahead of any calculation. Rabbi Fischel said that beautiful explanation to what the word Elul means. That it means really spying into ourselves. There's a fascinating midrash that is brought down in the Rosh on Chumash. The Rabbeinu Usher Rosh was from the Rishonim about 1,000 years ago. He was the father of the Tur Shulchan Aruch, the one who wrote the Shulchan Aruch. He was the Talmud of the famous Maharami Rottenberg that was imprisoned for being Jewish and refused to allow himself to be ransomed his whole life because he didn't want to establish a precedent that this was a good business. Rabbeinu Usher, the Rosh, brings a midrash in his Pirush al Torah. If you remember in Parshas Noach, right after the Mabul, the angels said, God, look what you did. Look at the generation of the flood. Look how terrible they are. Disgusting things that they're doing. The immorality, the taking advantage of one another. We told you not to make man. So Hashem said to the Malachim, to the angels, you guys think you're so great? You have no Yetzer Hara. He says, you send us down on this world. We'll deal with our Yetzer Hara. He said, I'm not so sure. So he sent the angels down to this world, and boy, they, all of a sudden they had a very, very difficult time with their Yetzer Hara. And as a matter of fact, they were the ones that in a certain sense led the Dor HaMabul in the worst ways possible. So the Midrash says that they approached a young girl, a virgin, a psula. And they were making advances toward her. They were huge. She saw that she could not. So she said to them, listen, don't force me, okay? I'm just asking you, I'll work with you. But you have these huge wings. These wings frighten the living daylights out of me. Take them off. So the Malachim took off the wings. And she was a little quicker than they thought she was. And she immediately grabbed the wings and flew up. And she comes to Borei Olam, and the Malachim wanted to chase her, but they didn't have their wings. And she says, Borei Olam, I'm a young girl. And I was overwhelmed by these Malachim, by these angels. And you put me into a generation of Dor HaMabul. You put me in a degenerative generation. The Nesionot, the Tavot, the temptations are so great. It is so hard to have emunah. Mathematically speaking, I don't have a chance to retain my innocence. God, I want to be good. I want to be a good girl. Help me. And God said, stay here. The feeling that you have, the recognition of how difficult it is to be pious and to be holy during a time like this is so well accepted. You will be the source of tshuva for all of Klal Yisrael. Each of the 12 months has what's called a mazel. Mazel, the constellation, the image of the stars change. The mazel of the month of Elul is psula, virgin. And she is the virgin, this girl. What does this mean? What's this all about? It is Agadat Chazal. Of course, we don't understand it at face value. And I want to try to spend a couple of moments to see how we can apply this to what this means. I saw in a sefer, someone asks a rabbi a very interesting question, sefer Achaz Sha'alti. He says he's looking out his window and he notices that this thief in Yerushalayim comes, ski mask, takes out an electric saw, and he starts sawing off the bars of someone's window. He picks up the phone, he calls the mishtara, he calls the police. A few minutes later, he hears the sirens. The guy drops the saw, drops his crowbar, runs for his life. They chase him and they catch him. But they leave the saw there. He walks outside, he picks up the saw, and he questions whether there is a mitzvah of hashavat aveidav, returning the lost item to this thief. That perhaps he should come down to wherever he's central booking, or wherever there is in Yerushalayim, and say, oh, by the way, here, this is yours. So he asks his rabbi, should I return it to the thief? So the rabbi said, absolutely not, al pi halacha, because if he's going to use it to break into other houses, assuming he wiggles his way out of the arrest, that you're not supposed to lend someone the support to be able to commit more sin. Plus, he said, that the fact is that he probably stole it from someone else, so try to find out who the real owner of this saw is. After a while, he writes back to the rabbi and says, the way I hear, this isn't a career criminal, but he was a person that really got caught in very, very tough times. And you know, his Yetzer Hara got the best of him. But his experiences with the law has really frightened the living daylights out of him, and as far as we know, he's a good man there. So he said, then go to him and ask him the question, where did you get this saw? And if he tells you that these saws are his, then return it to him. See, went over to him and the man started to cry. He says, yes, they're his. He never even did anything like that, and he returned it to him. So I think that here's the point. What is the most precious commodity in the world that we all need? Menuchat hanefesh, peace of mind. Without peace of mind, without tranquility, where are we? We're nothing, right? You know the story? That Chaim is pacing back and forth. His wife says to him, what's the matter? She goes, I owe my upstairs neighbor, Matl, I owe him $10,000. The loan is due tomorrow. I can't sleep. She goes, you can't sleep? She sticks her head out of the window. She goes, Matl, my husband will never pay you back, period. Now, let him pace back and forth the whole night and you go to sleep, he said. What is the most precious commodity we have? Peace of mind. Menuchat hanefesh. We need the security in our lives that allows us to function normally. And as much as we're so mathematically advanced and scientifically advanced, the chances are, and there are studies to support this, that your great-grandfather had a lot more tranquility and peace of mind than we have. Limud HaTorah, Kedushat HaTorah brings peace of mind. When we have a chance, we'll touch on it to understand why. So coming into Rosh Hashanah, we ask God for life. Ask God for life. Someone that goes to a doctor, and the doctor says, I don't think it's anything yet, but could be something developing. You'll have to come in every 3 months for a CAT scan. And let's say it goes for the next 10 years, and it never developed into a full-fledged problem. He's lucky, right? Yes. But where was his peace of mind? Where was his tranquility? We never had this before in life, what people are faced with today. Your great-grandfather, your great-grandmother was sick, she lived, she died. One of the two. Today, people living with complicated medical results and tests and the constant comeback to check again and again and again. We live with pressures that we never ever had before in our lives. Because we're so scientifically knowledgeable, we recognize potentials to our life. How does a person have peace of mind? Peace of mind today and tranquility is really what we need. It's the tools of life. Borei kol olam, I beg of you, I should have a Shabbat. I should be able to sit with my friends, sit with my family. I should be able to smile to my wife, to my husband. These are the tools of life. And what does God say to us? You don't have your tools right now? No, I don't have those tools. There's something that's keeping me up at night. So God says, I would love to return those tools to you. I would love to give you back the menuchat hanefesh, the peace of mind and the tranquility. But what are you going to do with it? And that's what the slichot are all about. That's what Rosh Hashanah is all about. That's what El. It's our way of proving to God, give me menuchat hanefesh, and I will use it to make the people around me happy. Give me menuchat hanefesh, and I will use it to say thank you to the tear of my grandmother all those years beforehand, wherever I was. You know, somebody once came to the great Hasidic rabbi, the Shineveh Rav. He was the son of the Divrei Chaim. And he pleaded with him, Rabbi, I want a child. I want a child. And the Rabbi put his head down, went to sleep. The Hasidim knew that meant the Rabbi, going for a tour in the heavenly spheres trying to find the child for him. But this man took that as an insult. I'm begging you for a child, you're going to sleep on me? He turns around and walks out. The next man steps up. He was an older gentleman, a grandfather, who came to ask the Rebbe some business advice. And after a few minutes, the Rebbe opens his eyes and grabs his hands and says, I promise you, this year you will have a son. He goes, no, me? No, not me. I'm finished already. I'm a grandfather. Please, I'm married off all my kids. The Rebbe says, it's too late. We don't take back brachot. Can I exchange it? No. And he had a son that year. And you know something? That was the only son that survived the war. He had a big family beforehand. Sons, daughters, they got married, grandchildren. This was the only son that survived the war. There are times in our life that we seem to be getting brachot from Shemayim that we think we don't need. What are you doing to me? Rabbi Shalom, I'm asking you for oranges. Why are you giving me apples? And God says, trust me. I know better than what you need. And when we relinquish control and we say, you know what, God, you know better than what I need, Hashem says, oh, you trust me? I can give you back the tools of menuchat hanefesh. So a fellow comes over to me and he says, it was last year Lag BaOmer, Rab Shimon. He says, I want to do something for Rab Shimon. I said, what do you want to do for him? He says, give me something to do. I said, everyone knows what they can do. I said, why don't you work on your shmirat einayim? Be careful what you look at. He said, it's the summer, I work in Manhattan. What? Be careful what I look at. Where? What? Wherever you turn. So I said to him, how do you go home? He says, I go home by subway. Well, that doesn't help. I said to him, you know what? Take the express bus. It's a couple of dollars more. You're sitting in a seat. It's more, the chances of watching your eyes, looking into a book, you're not in a squashed downtown number 3 train, men, women pressed together. You want to do something? You're asking me, I don't know, I'm not the Navi, lo Navi, lo ben Navi Anochi. Well, you're asking me, that's what I would tell you. Okay. So he calls me up the next day on Lag BaOmer. He says, the problem with the express bus is that it runs every hour. And I just missed it. Can I take the subway home? I said, do whatever you want. He says, no, I want to do the right thing. I don't know. Now, I want to do the right thing, so what do you want from me? I said, should I take the subway or should I stand there in Manhattan for another hour? So I says, what do you think? He says, standing on the street, on Broadway and 34, whatever he was. He says, for another hour, you may as well take the subway home. I said, okay. But in your heart, you have to figure out, you committed yourself to something. Is this a cop-out, an excuse or not? I can't answer that for you. He says, I'm going to stay. In that case, I'm going to stay. But just today, no problem. He calls me 2 hours later. He says 59 minutes later, the express bus pulls up. He's about to get on. he sees a family from Jerusalem coming. They had walked all the way from the Port Authority. They didn't speak a word of English, crying their heads off. They were so lost. Their phone wasn't working. He ran over to them. He asked them what their problem was. They had somebody was supposed to pick them up from the Port Authority. The whole thing, he was able to direct them. He took them with him on the bus, wound up taking them home with him. He gave them supper and then drove them to where they were supposed to be. He said, I don't know what would have happened to them. Eventually, they would have met another Jew. I don't know what would have happened. They didn't speak a word of English. So he says, so what happened here? Let's try to sort this out. I said, let's sort it out. You wanted to do something for Rab Shimon. There is nothing greater than Achnasat Orchim. There is no greater schut. Yeah, but I was doing Shmirat Einayim. We try to do what we think is right. What God leads it to, that leave up to Him. Leave it up to Him. Many years ago, I visited a girl who just had a stroke, Rahman al-San, a young girl. And as an after effect of this stroke, the muscles that keep her eyelids open didn't work. Most of the time, with the exception of during speeches, our eyelids naturally stay open. During a speech, it's very, very hard. I know. But most of the time, it's our eye. You don't have to fight to keep your eyes open. You know, if you want to keep your hand up for a while, after it begins to hurt, your eyelids naturally stay open. Like there a spring in there? There's muscles that naturally stay open. You would have to fight to close your eyes unless you're tired and sleeping. You take those little muscles for granted. This girl, Nebuch, had a stroke, and it affected that part of the brain that sends the messages to those muscles. As a result, she could not lift her eyelids. There's nothing wrong with her eyes. The only way that she could see was to paste her eyelids open, a little tape, and keep her eyelids open. Younger. And after I went to visit her, she said to me, do something for me. So I had an idea. I came into yeshiva, and I said, you know what? This girl can't open her eyes. Some of us have a problem. We don't close our eyes when we're supposed to. Let's all make up Shmirat Einayim. It should be a schut for this girl. And I said it. And I said it to a group of people. And I said it in a couple of places. And I wondered. And the next day I had to be in Manhattan for a doctor's appointment. And on the way back, and I'm out of Midtown, this big tractor trailer, beep, what does he want from me? How much I run for my lives? You know, he's going to yell something nasty about Jews. And he rolls down the window. He says, come here. I want to show you something. And I walk over. I didn't even see a kippah on his head. He says, come up, come up. I don't know how to climb up on these things. That's what he wants. And on the dashboard, he has the girl's name. He says, don't worry. I said, you got to keep your eyes open when you drive the truck. He says, no, don't worry. When I drive the truck, I keep my eyes open. But when I stop for a red light, or I stop and they're loading and unloading, I close my eyes. I have in mind Shabbat Refuah for this girl. I said, where did you hear about this? He saw it on Torah Anytime. I said, do we know the power of the Mesirat Nefesh that Klal Yisrael has over the years? Do we know what we're supposed to do? No. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu says you don't have to know what's supposed to do. Try, and I am going to guard you. Why the Metzoi Shabbat Slichot? What is so important about it? Because Adam HaRishon sinned from the Chet Eitz Hadas. When did he eat? Before Shabbat. Had he only waited till Shabbat, it would have been permissible to him. Like most Averot. If you just have a little patience, you get it anyway. So God really should have thrown him out of Gan Eden right before Shabbat. Hashem said, no, I'm going to keep you till Matzoi Shabbat. On Matzoi Shabbat, he was thrown out of Gan Eden, out of heaven, and plunged into a darkness that he had never experienced before his entire life. He had never seen such darkness. And what did he do? He took two sticks and rubbed it together, created a little fire. And he looks at Chava, looks at Eve. Chava looks at him and says, this is what we have, this fire. You know what we had till now? In Gan Eden we had Or HaGanuz. You know what the Or HaGanuz is? Imagine you're struggling with a child that's not well, Chas v'Shalom. Imagine there's a Shalom Bayit problem. Imagine a person is waiting for the results of an audit or of a biopsy, the things that take away the Menuchat HaNefesh. And you have a light and says, don't worry, in 6 weeks it's going to be all resolved and there's going to be a happy ending. Great! I'll do what I have to in 6 weeks. I'll go for tests. I'll do whatever I have to do as long as I know there's a happy ending. Shalom Bayit, it's going to be happy at the end. I'm going to have a blissful marriage and wonderful children. I'll do whatever it takes. That was the Ar HaGanus. Problem was, people used it for the wrong reasons. It's going to work out anyway. Okay, God, I don't need you. So the man that's desperately looking for a parking place is desperately looking for a parking place. He's late for a meeting. He says, God, I promise you, if you give me a parking place, I will give tzedakah, I will give charity. I promise you, give me a parking place, I'll be so nice to my mother-in-law, you can't even imagine. And suddenly he goes, God, forget it, someone just pulled out. I got a spot, forget it. Don't need you. Somebody said, a guy won the lottery, what are you going to do? The first thing I'm going to do, he says, is absolve all my vows. What do we do with menuchat hanefesh? This is what we want to do now. We want to create menuchat. We want to say, God, give me menuchat hanefesh, and I will use the right things for it. Now we lost this Ar HaGanus, and it's Matzoi Shabbat. And Adam looks at Chava. They're locked out of Gan Eden. There's two big angels with big swords spinning their swords, and they look at each other and they burst into tears. And Adam says to Chava, "Come, we made a light." She looks at that fire. That's a fire. That fire is going to save us. You know how much pain the world's going to suffer? And Adam says, this is where we are now. I'm not blaming you, and you're not blaming me. But life is going to go on. And right afterwards, he gives Chava a name. It happened only afterwards. He calls her Chava, because you are Eim Kol Chai, the mother of all living things. What happened here? If I was Adam, I would have an esayon. Fine mess you got into now, Chava. Instead, he says, what happened, happened. We pick up the pieces from now. That is Matzoi Shabbat. It's a very, very measly fire compared to the Ar HaGanus. But it's what we have. We're going to make it work. We're going to make it work. I had an uncle who used to be a very wealthy man, lost everything, moved into a tiny, tiny apartment. And I was a little kid, and I remember he tells his wife and kids, it's nothing compared to what we have. But guess what? We're going to make it work. He never got back his money. But I could promise you, he had a simchat hachayim that he never had until now. Matzoi Shabbat is the time in our lives where we say, God, I made so many mistakes in my life. But guess what? I'll take what I have, and I'm going to make it work. I'm not angry at my spouse. I'm not angry at the world. I'm not angry at the person that predicted where I should be and where I ought to be. I want to pick up the world from where it is now. That is why we say slichot with special emphasis on Matzoi Shabbat. There is light at the end of the tunnel. And if you eat Melava Malka, which is the Su'udah of Matzoi Shabbat, what are you promised? That you will wake up Tchiyat HaMesim. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to Adam Harishon, you know what you just did? I can't reverse the Chet Eitzadas. There's going to be death, there's going to be pain, there's going to be wars. But you know what you just did? You promised that at the end of the day there will be Tchiyat HaMesim. Life is going to come back. Relax. Take it easy. A man told me that he was in Kovna during the war. And he was desperate to get a visa. And there was a long line of people. It's not like, you don't get tickets to the ball game. You'll have to watch it at home. No visa, death. And you can imagine, there was no killing, there was no pushing. They were just standing on line. And every time the line moved, he was very anxious, and he was perspiring, and he was holding his chest. And a Yid turned around to him, and he said to him, I see you're very nervous. Go ahead of me. Go ahead of you? You know what you're saying? I should go ahead of you? It's not who gets into the movie? Go ahead of me. Why are you doing this? He says, none of us have any guarantee whether we're going to live or not. I see your pain. Go ahead. He went ahead of him. He got his visa. He was petrified. What do I do if this man doesn't get his visa? He did get his visa. He found out later who this person was. It was Rav Schneier, the son of Rabbi Aaron Kotler, in Kovna. And many years later, he's in Lakewood. Rav Aaron, the great Rosh Hashiva of Lakewood, passes away. And before they were taking the body away to be buried, people were rushing to try to ask Mechila to stand and say a prayer. And he's pushing and pushing and pushing. Someone in front of him turns around and says, go ahead of me, no problem. And he looks to see who it is. It's Rav Schneier again, his son. So I won't get a chance to say Mechila to my father? Fine. You're so anxious, go ahead of me. He said, you did this to me once in Kovna with the visa. And Rav Schneier said, in life I learned. You want to take control? You may get what you want, but you lose your simchat hachayim. This is who I am. You're so anxious, go ahead of me. You may lose your visa, but you have simchat hachayim. Matzoi Shabbat was when Adam said to Chava, I'm not angry. I take full responsibility. It's a little fire. We're going to make it work. And Hashem says, you're willing to do that? It's going to work. This week is the yahrzeit of the first Belzerav, the Sar Shalom of Belz, the old Belz dynasty. And he learned in a Kabbalah Sefer that if you're up for 1,000 nights consecutively, you merit to see Eliyahu Hanavi. He wants to see Eliyahu Hanavi so badly. And the door, and he sits down with two guys, we're going to do it. And one of them does it for 20 nights. After the 20th night, he said, count me out. The other one went for 400 nights. The Sar Shalom, the Belzerav, went 1,000 nights. Night number 1,000. His wife stood there and supported him. She stood there with a candle. It's night number 1,000. He's in the shul. He has to make it through one more night. And suddenly the winds start blowing. They couldn't predict hurricanes beforehand. They didn't have these sophisticated models that contradict each other. They just didn't know. He stood there and all of a sudden, such lightning, such thunder. It seemed that the very foundation of the shul would fly up into the air and rip apart. He was overwhelmed with fear and panic. The wind blew out the lights. Everything started to fall. It started caving in. The ceiling started caving in. He wanted to run for his life, but he understood it's the 1,000th night. He opened the Aron Kodesh. He said, Borei Kol Olamim, what do you want from me? 999 nights, and now you're scaring me to death? He says, do whatever you want from me. I just want to do the right thing. Tell me what to do. And as he's there with the open of the Aron Kodesh, suddenly the door opens up, and in walks a man. He says, you want to learn with me? Never introduced himself as Eliyahu Hanavi. He just said, you want to learn with me? And they sat down, and they learned together Hilchot Beis HaKnesset. And afterwards, he built the famous Belz Beis HaKnesset. There were many miracles around that Beis HaKnesset. He ordered people to come and help mixing the concrete and told them to stay there for a specific amount of times. And there were certain people, there was a bridge that collapsed, there were tragedies that took place, and they weren't by the tragedy because they were there, because he had ordered them. I don't want to get into it now. When the Germans tried to blow up this Beit Midrash, they failed multiple times. Eventually, they took it apart brick by brick. None of the mechanical means of mass destruction worked. And the Belz Beis HaKnesset in Yerushalayim today is a replica of what this was. I want to tell you something, my friends. The 1,000th night is all of us. We will all have that 1,000th night. The night that threatens our very existence. We're all this girl that says, it's impossible. I can't stand up to angels. I can't do it. So God, what do you want from me? And you know what God wants from us? He wants us to open the Aron Kodesh and admit, I can't do it. I need your help. And as soon as we do that, there is a grant. There is an automatic grant that Eliyahu Hanavi is on the way. Fear not. The great seer of Lublin, the Chayz of Lublin, he once said that the Dor HaMidbar was the perfect generation. Mashiach should come. God said, big deal. You were surrounded, you were together with Moshe Rabbeinu, you're surrounded by Ananei HaKavod, by celestial clouds, manna from Shemayim, water from Miriam. The Dor of the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, nah, all bad. Dor HaMabul, look what you did. I gave you a perfect world. Sorry, Dor HaMabul. I gave you a perfect world. You know what you did? You cheated each other. You lied to each other. You took advantage of your tranquility only to give up on life, and no one cared for each other. So what do you want from us? If Mashiach will not come to the perfect generation, it won't come to the most unperfect generation. What's our hope? So God said it's going to come to a generation that has a mixture of both. There will be a generation before Mashiach comes that will be the best of the best and the worst of the worst. Look at our generation today, my dear friends. There are more yeshivot than there ever was. More Talmidei Chachamim than there ever was. And there are more nisyonot and more tests than there ever was. And it's all mixed in one pot. And we are that girl that says, I cannot stand up to these angels. We are that 1,000th night. And all HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants from us is, please, open up your, just say, I need you. Once we say to Hashem, I need you, He does the rest. There was a man, his name was Rav Shaul Veil. I'll conclude with this. Shaul Veil was king of Poland for one night. King of Poland for one night. What happened? What happened was the Polish king died, and his nephew was the heir to the throne. He was in the Swiss Alps, and it would take him more than a day to get back. And according to Polish law, you could not have a king. Poland, the sun cannot set without a Polish king. He was an advisor to the king. He was Jewish, dressed in very Jewish garb. So all the knights said, I'll be king for one night, I'll be king for one night. Over my dead body you are. They all pulled their swords. So someone said, let the Jew be king overnight. He won't last more than one night anyway. It was inconceivable there should be a Jewish king over Poland. And this way will satisfy the Polish constitution. So he took the job of being king one night. They said to him, why are you doing this? He said, trust me. As soon as he became king, he started freeing Jews that were imprisoned because of prison taxes, started changing the laws that allowed for local landowners to beat the peasants. He was up the entire night. But there was nothing they could do. He was king for the night. The next day, the new king showed up. He gave him over his crown and said, one night's enough for me. And he said to him, Shaul, do me a favor, stay here. Stay here. I'm a young king. I don't know what to do. I need advice. So he stayed there. And he said, what's the first thing I should do? I have no sons. He said, you need an heir to the throne. Make sure your daughter, the princess, marries a son-in-law that is worthy of being king. She said, but what's your problem? I need a good son. Who should I take that should be worthy to be king? He says, okay, well, look around. And suddenly the new king says, Shaul, I have an idea. Your son, Meir. My son, Meir. Wrong religion? Well, we'll take care of that. Come on, a little water on his head is not going to kill him. He'll be the prince, heir to the throne. Shaul Veil saw he was in trouble. And when he said, nah, not a good shidduch. You know, it's good. Maybe call me next week. You know, he's still learning. And the king said, no. I want your son-in-law. I want your son for my son-in-law. As Shaul raced home, he panicked. He knew there's only one thing he can do. According to Polish law, once you were married, you weren't allowed to marry the princess. He had to get her married. He called up the Schachter and he says he needs a shidduch in 59 minutes or less. There was one eligible girl in town who happened to be dying. They ran to her, her family is standing around crying. As Shaul reaches over and says to her, you're leaving this world, can you do one more mitzvah? Can you marry my son? And he tells her why. She agrees. He puts the ring on her finger, and suddenly the Chevra Kadisha is there. They don't think she has much. Her breathing becomes very labored. They go running out, and he says to the king, oh, if I would have known. Too bad. He just got married. Here's the ketubah. Okay, it was too late. King didn't like it. Okay, fast forward a couple of years later. Rav Shaul is a great rich man. He has hours that he sees poor people. Suddenly there's a knock on the door. Knock, knock, knock. Opens up the door. Yeah, there's a woman over here. How can I help you? It's not the hours today. You can come. I must talk to you. I mean, you can't. It's not the hours. What do you want? I'm your daughter-in-law. Oh, come on. I heard of all kinds of excuses people have to get in over here. But I don't have a daughter-in-law. She says, yes, you do. This is a foolish argument. I don't have a daughter-in-law. She shows him the ring. But I thought, now there's no diplomatic way of saying, but you're supposed to be dead. What are you doing here? There's no real nice way of saying that. She says, right, when you came to me, I said, you're crazy. I'm dying and you want me to get married? And I said, what's this world anyway? Whatever mitzvah, if I have the opportunity to do this mitzvah the last second. So I did it, and right afterwards, I started feeling better. It was a long road to recovery, but I'm up and kicking, and I want my husband. He says, you got to understand, the whole thing was just, it was just a ruse. It wasn't real. What do you mean? There was 2 witnesses. You gave me a ring. There's ketubah. What do you mean? I want my husband. And she starts screaming at the top of her lungs. And her son walks in. He goes, who's that crazy lady screaming over there? Your wife. She says, I insist to talk to him. So he explains to her, you know, the whole thing was just, what do you mean the whole thing? God put this together, that you should marry me. Yeah, but that was only because. There's always an only because. Some people want to marry because they think the girl is pretty, or they marry because they think the girl has money. So God, you married me because you had to get away from the princess. What's the difference? God put it together. You don't believe it? So he calls her in. He says, listen. He says, she was 10 years older than him. He says to her, I realize you went through an experience. I'm willing to give you take a divorce. I'm willing to give you a lot of money. She says, I'm not taking a divorce. And she says, if you don't believe that God put together this shidduch, then you should have married the princess anyway. You don't believe in God anyway. She goes, hey, you know, you're talking to me like you're my wife. Berecheretz. She said, my uncle, she was an orphan girl. Her uncle was the great Ramah, Ramosha Isserlis, great rabbi of Krakow, Mechaber of Shulchan Aruch, of the Rashi letters that come along Bet Yosef. And they went to him, and he said, she's right. she has a right to demand what she wants. God put it together. And Rav Shaul bursts into tears. He says, he's my only son. I have no children. She's 10 years. Some say she was 15 years older than him. Ramah said, you want to make sure she has children? She's going to have, I'll give you a bracha, she's going to have children. He told them to change their last name to Tu'umim, which means twins. And he said, Ko sevarchu es b'nei Yisrael. Ko is 25. There's two versions to the story. There's one version that was either her, some say it was the next generation, but either her or her daughter had 12 sets of twins. Okay? Talk about buying Pampers wholesale. 12 sets of twins and one boy. That was Ko sevarchu es b'nei Yisrael. And if you will do a history, they called it Tu'umim family, Tu'umim. If you'll do a history, especially amongst Ashkenazic Jews, most people around are somewhere have yichus, are children of these Tu'umim family. Whenever I speak in Ashkenazic circles, I always say, does anyone know that they're a member of the family? Usually somebody comes forth, yes, my grandmother, my father, my mother. And once I was duped, nobody came forth, and someone came to me and said, you know, your father-in-law, his mother's mother was also a grandchild of one of these kids. I said, okay, now I can say wherever I speak, at least I know there's someone there. How does this happen? The greatest brachot in life come from impossible situations. It doesn't come from when everything mathematically is working out our way. It comes from when this little girl is surrounded by angels and she says, God, what can I do? Help me. I acknowledge my problems. It comes from the 1000th night when the storm threatens our very existence and we don't give up. And we say, Borei kol olamim, what happened, happened. Teach me how to pick up the pieces and go on. When we do that, then Eliyahu Navi is here. When we do that, there is a continuity to Klal Yisrael, to our own essence, to our lives, that could have never existed if not for that. Thank you very much. Shua Tov.